Ladies and gentlemen, we would now like to begin the conference on the international legal issues and response for discharging Fukushima nuclear water release. I would like to kindly ask all guests to take their seats. And also, we have overseas experts joining us online. And I'd like to kindly ask you all to join us. Let us now begin the conference on the international legal issues and response for discharging Fukushima nuclear water release. I would like to extend my gratitude and welcome to all of you. I am Choi Kyu-young, Senior Research Fellow for Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Party of Korea. We'll now engage in a Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise and face the national flag in the front. Salute the flag. I pledge in front of the proud Taegukgi flag allegiance to the Republic of Korea for the eternal glory of the country, liberty, and freedom of the country. We will end it here. Please take your seats. I would now like to introduce you to the participants joining us today. First, we have our host, Honorable So Byung-moon, member of the National Assembly, Chairperson of Agriculture, Rural Affairs, Oceans and Fisheries Committee. And we have our co-host, Honorable Lee Jae-jung, member of the National Assembly, Vice Chairperson of Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee. We have lawmaker Park Bum-ge. We have lawmaker Yang Lee-won-young. And we have lawmaker Kim Hong-gol. And let me now introduce you to our panelists. We have our speaker, Dr. Choi Ji-hyun, professor of Jeju National University Law School. He is to give us a presentation today. And we have as our panelists, Chang Mari, campaigner for Greenpeace. And we have lawyer Song Gi-ho. And we also have distinguished participants joining us virtually. We have Dr. Robert Richmond, professor at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And we have nuclear engineer expert and currently Fairwind's chief engineer, Arnie Gunderson. Yes, let us now continue. We have former spokesperson for the nuclear industry and currently the founder and president of Fairwind's Energy Education, Maggie Gunderson. We are also joined by a key individual who informed the world of the dangers of Fukushima contaminated water released through the documentary Fukushima Disaster, Director Philip Carrillo. And we have Dana Ng-o, environmental activist from the US. And we have Anna von Ribe, international maritime law lawyer based in Germany. And we have Mr. Mike Malakama. Thank you very much, and that concludes the introductions of our speakers and panelists. And of course, we have lawmaker Ri Song-gun as well joining us. Thank you very much. Now we would like to hear from our host, Honorable So Byung-hoon, Chairperson of Agriculture, Food, Rural Affairs, Oceans and Fisheries Committee. Please deliver your opening remarks. It's a great pleasure to meet you all. I am So Byung-hoon, member of the National Assembly. And I would like to welcome you all to the conference on the international legal issues and response for discharging Fukushima nuclear waste release. And we also have our special speakers, panelists joining us. And I would also like to extend my gratitude to our lawmakers here today for joining us. It's important for us to come together to struggle against the release of the nuclear wastewater. I really hope that we can encourage one another and to make sure that the contaminated water from the Fukushima power plant no longer concerns us, so that we really hope that we can root out the cause of our current struggle. There is, of course, a very lengthy opening remarks in the booklet, so I would just like to share with you a couple of comments before we begin. The accident of the Fukushima nuclear power plant took place in 2011 due to the Tokyo earthquake. It was a major catastrophe, and at that time, due to that earthquake, it led to a tsunami, a major hail, which actually led to a issue with the cooling of the reactor system. And with the disruption of the cooling system, the nuclear fuel led to a major leakage. And already 800 tons of the remnants still remain, a total of 880 tons. And I do know that it still leads to major and massive heat. And another point is that the residents there cannot actually withstand for a couple of hours, even a couple of hours in the vicinity. So we can see that what's happening right now is we are cooling the nuclear fuel right now with water, and that water that's used for cooling purposes is what's noted as Fukushima contaminated water. However, I believe that it's not just contaminated water. I think that this is a very politically correct way of saying it or putting things, but it's basically nuclear waste. It's a radioactive waste and water that is being released. And this Fukushima nuclear plant accident is very much similar to the Chernobyl issue. It's close to grade 7, a major nuclear accident. And we can say that it's one of the most disastrous nuclear accidents of mankind. And not only that, I do want to mention that the contaminated water that comes from the exposure from nuclear fuel is basically nuclear waste. And even if there is not direct interaction or any exposure, we can say that it's mid to low reactor waste that's currently not being disposed or discarded. You can see that right now it's being basically buried on land. However, these mid to low level wastes are currently just on the verge of being disposed out into the waters. And that's why we decided to put together this emergency discussion session and conference. I do know that there are many experts to share with us their insights. So I would like to lend a serious ear to the comments. And I will, along with the members of the National Assembly and the people, do my very best to make sure to prevent the dumping and discharge of this nuclear waste from Fukushima. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to invite over Honorable Jae-jung Lee, Member of the National Assembly and also Vice Chair of Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee. Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank all of you for joining us here today, not only in person but also over Zoom from Europe. We also have some experts. I understand that it's early in the morning in Europe. So despite that time difference, we have come together in order to ensure sustainable growth of our Mother Earth and also to ensure health of the global citizens. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my welcome and also my appreciation to all the participants. And especially, I would like to thank Honorable Andrew Napwat, Deputy Speaker of the Vanuatu Parliament, for the commitment, and also Dr. Ji-hyun Choi from the Jeju National University Law School, and also our discussant Ki-ho Song lawyer from Suryeon Asia, and also Dr. Robert Richmond and Director Felipe Carollo, who filmed the documentary Fukushima Disaster. He also served as a bridge amongst us. So once again, I'd like to extend my special thanks to Director Felipe Carollo. I know that the time is ticking, and Japan is soon to dump the radioactive water into the waters, and I think that it's really important that we come together in order to prevent that. I think that the government actually has to take the lead on behalf of the citizens and also the people, but the government of Korea is not taking those measures. Therefore, we are trying to search whether or not there is a solution that we could seek through the IMO and also through the collaborative efforts of the NGOs throughout the world. And A few days ago, Pacific Island country representatives came together in Korea to discuss this matter. And again, I think that it's very important that we cement our efforts and also cooperation so that we can prevent the dumping and also ensure sustainable growth of the earth. I hope that this serves as a good model going forward. Thank you.
And we are now currently joined by Honorable Park Kwang-un, floor leader of the Democratic Party of Korea. Your remarks, please.
Thank you very much. And we here, as you can see from the screen, we have distinguished participants joining us over Zoom. Good to see you all. I am Kwang-un Park, member of the National Assembly and also the floor leader of the Democratic Party of Korea, which is the opposition party in Korea. I would like to first and foremost extend my gratitude to Honorable Jae-jung Lee and also Honorable Byung-kun So for hosting this meaningful conference. Fukushima radioactive water dumping is an important issue from the perspectives of Korea. In two ways, I would say. First of all, together with the Japanese government and also TEPCO of Japan, there is this issue of disingenuity. Can they ensure that the water is safe before dumping? And once the water is released, would it not affect the marine resources and also neighboring countries, including Korea and also Pacific Island countries? Would it not have any impact? So on that very important issue, I believe that there is this issue of disingenuity of the Japanese government, also TEPCO, and second, the Korean government. Against the Japanese government has been making an unclear stance on the issue of this radioactive water dumping. I think that the number one priority of a government is to ensure the safety and health of its citizens and its people. The government that fails to do so would not be appreciated by its own people. It's not going to be tolerated. And I believe that in that sense, this conference is very important. The Japanese government and TEPCO's intent to dump the radioactive water needs to be prevented. And on this very topic, we have invited over many distinguished experts to find solutions. As was mentioned by Honorable Jae-jung Lee, yes, we can try and seek a solution through the international laws and also marine laws. I think that it's very important for us to seek the foundation or the legal basis to address this matter. And that is the reason why we have put together this conference. I understand that the experts joining us from overseas will share with us important insights and advice to that end. Again, I believe that dumping radioactive water into the waters is really hazardous and really risky, and it is not something that we can undo once it's done. And I believe that to prevent it, the international community has to come together. It's not just a matter that concerns neighboring countries of Japan. I believe that it will affect the entire world, and therefore I think that we need to join forces, join hands to prevent this move of Japan. Again, I hope that today's conference can provide us with many insights to find solutions and prevent the dumping of radioactive water from Fukushima Daiichi. Once again, thank you very much for joining us here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to invite Honorable Andrew Naput, former Minister of Internal Affairs and Deputy Speaker of Vanuatu Parliament, for his special address. And please utilize the simultaneous interpretation receivers. It's channel 3 if you need Korean interpretation.
Dear friends, greetings from the beautiful islands of Vanuatu in the South Pacific Ocean. Please allow me to thank the organizers of this event, and especially the Honorable Chai Chung-lee, Member of Parliament of South Korea, and her team for organizing such an important event. I also would like to thank the keynote speakers who are going to participate in this important event. Let me begin by placing on record that the discussions in this event are not about expression of political views. They are not about defending geopolitical interests. This is rather about discussing a very, very important issue that concerns the livelihood and survival of our people who are living in the Pacific Islands and the Pacific Ocean. Let me give you a bit of background. In the year 1995, 13 Pacific Island nations decided to come together to sign a treaty called the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty. This treaty was later ratified by our respective parliaments. In Vanuatu, our parliament ratified the treaty in 1996. The leaders in the Pacific came to witness the devastating impacts of nuclear activities around the world. And so they decided to come up with such a treaty to send a message to the nations around the world that Pacific must continue to remain nuclear free. We became aware of Japan's intention to dump the radioactive water into the ocean last year, and members of parliament from across the Pacific have come out to voice their concern to Japan to reconsider their intention to dump this radioactive water into the ocean. The reason why our Pacific Island nations decided to come up with such a position is because we come from relatively small island nations and small island states, and our people depend on what our small islands produce and also the ocean. So any activity that contaminates the ocean or the land is going to be the end of our survival. In Fiji last year, our leaders similarly agreed to send a message to Japan that they must reconsider the dumping of the radioactive water into the ocean. Based on several scientific information that we got from the scientists and experts, we have come to realize that the water that Japan is intending to dump into the ocean is not safe. Therefore, if Japan is intending to dump the water into the ocean, it must consult the Pacific Island nations. It must consult the leaders of the Pacific Island nations. The reason why we have continued to state our objection to this activity that is going to be done by Japan is because we believe that the water is not safe, the radioactive water is not safe. Based on a film by Philip Carrillo called The Fukushima Disaster, The Hidden Side of the Story, it has become very clear that the water is not safe. And based on scientific information from experts and scientists, they have stated very clearly that the water is not safe. Therefore, based on that, we are calling on Japan to stop the dumping of the radioactive water into our oceans and to consult and allow independent experts to go and conduct their own assessments and come up with conclusions to inform us that the water is safe before we can make further decisions. And I believe that the discussions in this event is going to shed more light on this topic, and I thank you all for taking the time to participate and for expressing the views of our people on what is ahead of us. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was Honorable Andrew Napuat. He initially intended to join us on online. However, due to other commitments, he was not able to do so, and instead he sent us his video. Now, before we begin today's conference, we will take a group picture first, since there are some people who will have to leave early. So I'd like to kindly remind everyone to come forward for this group picture.
Yes, please face the camera. Thank you very much. Please take your seats. I would now like to seek short greetings from our lawmakers here today, and I would like to kindly ask you to spare about a minute due to time constraints. We would like to engage one more time for a commemorative photo op with all of our overseas participants joining us virtually. We would like to all take a picture together, all our participants both online and offline. So once again, 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much for your cooperation. Thank you, and we would now like to listen to brief greetings from the lawmakers joining us for 1 minute or so. So first, lawmaker Park Bum-ge. Yes, I believe that this is an excellent conference. We currently have a lawsuit underway at the courts, and I do know that Dr. Choi will be citing the London Convention, the UNCLOS, where Japan is also a state party. And there's a total of 3 conventions where currently Japan has already signed. And according to the Japanese constitution, any international treaties or any international norms and legal platforms are to be abided by. However, despite all that, you can see that right now with regard to TEPCO's actions regarding the Fukushima nuclear incident, it seems as if this actual action has actually circumvented the international norms, and they're saying that this is an exemption which really is groundless. If Japan really seeks international peace, and if it does understand that the common good for all, the oceans, and dumping nuclear contaminated water into these oceans actually goes against the constitution, and I really hope that Japan does understand this, and in that aspect today is an excellent forum to discuss the wrongdoings. I would like to extend my gratitude to our overseas experts as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We also have Lee Sung-kwon joining us online. We can't hear you. Please turn on your mic. Honorable Wee, you have to turn on your mic. Yes, greetings everyone. I am with the Democratic Party, and I'm the chairperson of the Democratic Party Committee on the Prevention of Dumping of Fukushima Radioactive Water. My constituency is in Seogwipo, Jeju Island, and I'm joining you in Jeju, Korea. Together with many international experts, it's a great honor and pleasure of mine to discuss this very important matter of the radioactive water dumping by Japan. I believe that we are entitled to enjoy the Pacific Ocean together, and I think that Japan is trying to undermine that. So I think it's really important that we take actions. I hope that going forward we can discuss this matter more ardently so that we can press Japan and dissuade Japan from dumping the wastewater into the ocean.
Yes, I would like to now invite Honorable Lawmaker Yang Won-young, a environmental expert. Yes, thank you very much. I am Yang Won-young from the Democratic Party of Korea, very much interested in the interest of the environment. We have from the U.S., from the Pacific, from Germany. We have experts from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us. And I can see that Lawmaker Lee, you really do have an excellent network, truly important member of the Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee of the National Assembly. As you're very well aware, the South Pacific has actually witnessed major nuclear testing and on the oceans and the waters, and humanity has seen for itself what kind of impact it can have, and that's why they've decided to actually make sure that any nuclear testing is prohibited. And there are times when we do believe that the ocean is infinite, and we do see dumping of waste, and we have been seeing this history of dumping of waste into our waters and oceans, but we do want to mention that this is not an infinite resource. It is actually suffering from so many contaminants and pollution. And not only that, we really do have seen international treaties progressing to make sure that there is no more waste dumped out into the oceans. In the case of Japan is what it has done. And when dumping their nuclear waste in the East Sea, which is between Russia and Korea, there is that history where there was a major complaint that was filed. And it's true that there were international efforts underway to prevent the dumping of waste. You can see that we have a particular material that is to be released, something that has not been verified of its safety, and especially water and wastewater that has been contaminated due to the nuclear power plant accident. And it is noted as so-called treated water, and it's just on the verge of being dumped out into the oceans. It's true that the countries are coming together to protect our Pacific, and we really need to join hands in this regard. And in that aspect, we do believe that it's very timely to host this conference on the legal issues, and especially the reason why we do want to seek an overview of international issues and responses, because we do have international norms, conventions, and UNCLOS-related matters. And that actually has to do with protecting our oceans and waters. And not only that, if it's any waste that is being discarded by a particular country, if it does impact another country, this is something that has to be strictly restricted. And that's why we want to review these actions, and it also may lead us to the logic to file a lawsuit in the international courts. And I do want to mention that this is a very important conference, and I will still to the very end to make sure that we can muster our collective wisdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite over Honorable Kim Won-gol. Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. We have the Japanese government and also lately the Korean government and also the ruling party of Korea. They seem to be claim that the treated water from the Fukushima Daiichi are safe, and they're telling us to trust the science and scientific research. But my question is the IAEA really interested in environmental protection, and is it an agency that puts number one priority on environmental protection? 8 years ago, IAEA gave its nod to the Japanese government that it's okay to release the radioactive water into the ocean. So can we trust the IAEA? And on top of that, once the radioactive waste is dumped into the waters for 20 to 30 years, we don't know what would happen and what sort of impact it's going to have. There is no scientific research on that. And also the equipment that the Japanese government is claiming to use in order before dumping the waters is not really tested over an extended period of time, and therefore I don't think that we can claim that the safety is scientifically proven. I have been interested in this matter for many years now, and once the radioactive water is dumped into the water, what is going to happen to Korea, China, Taiwan, and also other Pacific Island countries? I believe that it's going to be detrimental, and for that reason, I've been claiming for many years that all these neighboring countries need to come together in order to dissuade Japan from this move. And today, we have many environmental leaders joining us here today to discuss this very matter. And I think that it's very fortunate. Many will think that it's really late. However, I think that we still do have some time to turn this situation around. Thank you.
So I have lawmaker Yang Jong-suk. Would you also like to share with us some comments, please? Yes, with regard to the contaminated water of Fukushima, this is not only related to the livelihood of the fishers or the fishing community, but also the health of the people. And IAEA already, politically speaking, is not neutral, and we can see that it's very much biased and skewed currently. So it does seem to be in the hands of Japan. And if, let's say, something has been decided by IAEA, what would happen afterwards? We have fisheries products and goods that have to be imported, which would be the next stage of the approach. But it's true that we have announced that we will not be importing any of the fish products or marine products. And we've already filed a lawsuit, but then you can see that it may lead to many implications in many situations. Thank you very much for the good comments on our collaboration with the Pacific community. But I really want to mention that there are conscientious Pacific groups of Japan that are against contaminated water release and dumping. And I really hope that we can actually come closer and collaborate with the civic groups of Japan. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's it for brief comments. And with this, we would like to begin in earnest a conference on the international legal issues and response for discharging Fukushima nuclear water release. I would like to invite over one of our two key note speakers. First speaker is Professor Choi from Jeju University. You have 20 minutes. Yes, thank you very much. As was introduced, I am Ji-hyun Choi, and I teach at Jeju National University Law School. My apologies for the delay. Now I'd like to jump into my presentation. I think that the factual matters are all well clearly understood by many honorable parliamentarians. So I'm going to skip that part and then move on to the response by the Korean government. Now, 2 years ago, when Japan released its plan to release the radioactive water into the oceans, the Korean government decided to review whether or not we could take the matter to UNCLOS. And of course, Japan said that it's the intervention with internal affairs of Japan. But we also had Dr. Kim Hong-seok from Korea Institute of Nuclear Safety joining the IAEA to monitor the Fukushima Daiichi plan. However, there was a change of the administration in Korea, and the two leaders of Korea and Japan had a summit meeting and decided to dispatch an inspection team to Japan. And there was an inspection conducted, and then there was a report of their inspection results. Now I'm going to move on and talk about UNCLOS and what sort of measures that we can take in line with UNCLOS. Whenever I deliver a presentation, I take note of my audience, and last October I did actually deliver this presentation. So today, I think that there can be some people who are new to this issue, so I'm going to make it easy to understand as much as possible. Now, UNCLOS, or the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, was enacted and adopted back in 1982, and it was brought into force in 1994, and Korea also joined the convention in 1996, and Japan as well. There are 320 articles and 17 parts, and currently there are 168 signatories. Now, there were many international cases related to UNCLOS. About 5 or 6 years ago, there was the South China Sea incident. Whether or not the Chinese move on the South China Sea is constitutional, and whether or not it is in line with the UNCLOS. And also, we had the Chagos Archipelago incident in 2015. The UK, for about 10 years, was embroiled in this case. So again, I believe that the UNCLOS has a significant impact in the world. Now, when it comes to UNCLOS, I think that you are familiar with it in the context of the illegal fishing of China fishermen, and about the demarcation of the exclusive economic zones. And now if you look at UNCLOS Part 12, it talks about protection and preservation of the marine environment, and also 15 talks about settlement of disputes. Now, Part 12 can sound a bit ambiguous. So in the initial period, there were some concerns whether or not it would have some impact. However, I think that it clearly mentions what needs to be done by individual member countries to protect the marine environment. And also, if you look at Part 15 and also Article 286, it talks about the compulsory procedures entailing binding decisions and application procedures under this section. And as you can see, at the request of any party to the dispute, any dispute concerning the interpretation or application of this convention can be submitted to the court or tribunal having jurisdiction under this section. And so once any party to the dispute raises the issue, then the other party or the counterparty needs to respond to the suit. Now, when it comes to the Dokdo issue, even if the Japanese government takes the matter to the international court, we don't have to. Korea does not need to have to respond to it. However, UNCLOS is different. Once a party to the dispute raises an issue, then the other party needs to respond. If not, then absentee court ruling can be made, and that was the case of the South China Sea court ruling a few years ago. Now, what is going to be the dispute resolution process? Now, it's a bit complicated. Here you have 4 different options, and we have to pick and choose one in order to take the matter to UNCLOS. And one is the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, established in accordance with Annex 6, and the International Court of Justice and Sea Arbitral Tribunal, constituted in accordance with Annex 7, and a Special Arbitral Tribunal constituted in accordance with Annex 8. And if countries don't select one, then the default method is going to be C. Korea and Japan did not select any, and so probably we will have to do arbitral tribunal proceedings. But if the matter is taken to the International Tribunal for the Sea of the Sea, for the Law of the Sea, then it will be taken to that tribunal. And there is something called provisional measures. For urgent matters, we can seek provisional measures. Now, in order to put together a arbitral tribunal, then we have to put together the arbitration board or the arbitrators. And so in the meantime, we can seek provisional measures. Without the composition of the tribunal, then the ITLOS can issue a provisional measure. So again, together with a lawsuit and while waiting for the arbitral tribunal to be constituted, we can seek this provisional measures, and the interim tribunal can be put together and issue this provisional measures. Now, what are some of the articles that we can use in order to raise the issue to the UNCLOS? Now, there are not that many. However, if you look at Article 290, it says that member countries have a responsibility to work towards protecting marine environment. This can be good or bad for Korea. Now, Japan is saying that they understand the existence of the Article 290. However, Japan is claiming that is EEZ going to be contaminated by dumping of the radioactive water? But we can still cite Article 290. It's not like Korea is going to raise the issue and take the matter to UNCLOS because the dumping is going to hurt the Korean waters. Rather, Article 290 protects not only the Korean national interest and Korean waters, but it is more for the protection of the marine environment of the world. So if you look at the South China Sea back in 2016, against the Chinese government, the tribunal actually ruled that the waters belongs to the Philippines, or the waters was not belonging to any particular country, but China was using explosives in order to do fishing, and the tribunal ruled that it is in violation of Article 290. So, learning from that example, I think that we can use this article and cite this Article 290 that Japanese intent to dump radioactive water can undermine the marine environment of the world, not just Korea's EEZ. And here you can see Article 294, measures to prevent, reduce, and control pollution of the marine environment. And it says that states need to take necessary measures to prevent, reduce, and control pollution of the marine environment from any source. So this is also relevant, and I believe that Article 207 is also very relevant, pollution from land-based sources. Now, what it says is that states shall adopt laws and regulations to prevent, reduce, and control pollution of the marine environment from land-based sources, including rivers, estuaries, pipelines, and outfall structures, taking into account internationally agreed rules, standards, and recommended practices and procedures. And paragraph 5 also reads that states need to make efforts to minimize to the fullest extent possible the release of toxic, harmful, and nauseous substances. Again, Article 207 does not really pinpoint what not to do. However, it does regulate the pollution from land-based sources. So I think that we can take the matter to UNCLOS and see what their decision would be. And pipelines. Now, from the land-based source, not just land-based sources, including rivers, estuaries, but pipelines are also mentioned under Article 207. So I think that we can cite this when taking the matter to the arbitration. And also we have Article 204. This one is on the monitoring of the risks and effects of pollution. And Japan actually adopted environmental impact assessment from early on. And what this Article 207 is saying is that states, as far as practicable, directly or through the competent international organizations, to observe, measure, evaluate, and analyze by recognized scientific methods the risks or effects of pollution of the marine environment. And also, pursuant to Article 205, countries need to publish reports thereon. So, according to Article 204 and 205, Japan has to do environmental impact assessment and also report that. And what Article 205 also says is that the report has to be put together and also be submitted to the competent international organizations. And for that reason, I think that the Japanese government actually cooperated from early on with the IAEA. So again, the Article 205 is very important and relevant. But when it comes to environmental impact assessment, there were many incidents. And if you look at the court rulings of late, you can see that environmental impact assessments should be done prior to an action, but during the action, environmental impact assessment has to be carried out according to Article 206.
We believe that we do believe that they're going to push ahead with discharging contaminated water. So this is something that we need to emphasize, that environmental assessment and impact assessment is a continuing obligation. With regard to the professional measures, I think that I'll have to skip most of these items. But what's interesting is that according to UNCLOS, the provisional measures, typically what happens is that it's about protecting the individual rights of the countries. That's when then the filing is submitted and there are ruling coming out from the court. However, according to Article 290 of UNCLOS, it's about the rights of the international states, but also there are provisional measures that have to do with protecting the oceans and waters. Of course, that hasn't been tried. If we think about Korea and other coastal states, there are EEZs. Or let's say that there was a pollution or contamination of the territorial waters. This clause hasn't been tried as of yet. However, it's indicated in the clauses. It has to do with the marine protection. And if it has to do with any protection of common good, including waters and oceans, we can say that this clause can be something that we can actually identify if we do want to file a lawsuit to the international courts. So then, let us see what can be possible right now in terms of what can be claimed. So you can see that unlike domestic courts, it's not like there are specific types. It's something that actually encompasses everything. We can actually file and make many claims. It could be on the suspension of discharge of contaminated waste. It could be compensation for damages, or we can also seek a suspension of the discharge of any waste, or seek a severance to have it discontinue the contaminated water, because we can actually decide on the range. Would we say that it's going to be restricted across the board, or will we enable a discharge only when we actually check the safety of the contaminated water? So depending on that, the range and scope can differ because there is no pre-identified range in terms of the filing. So then, can we actually win? Well, as mentioned, in terms of the claims, it's quite comprehensive, and depending on the contents of the claim, of course, the case of the probability of winning can also differ, and it can also lead to a different type of lawsuits. Because if you look at the international lawsuits or courts, it's not like we do not actually claim or not claim. It may be interpreted as such and in a different fashion. So typically what happens is it has to do with predictability. In other words, it's about predicting what's unpredictable. So whether we can win or not, we do not know for sure. But what I can say is that depending on this case, there are so many claims, and based on the international environmental law, there are many principles that we can go upon. One actually has to do with precautionary principle. So for instance, because there is scientific uncertainty, that should not delay any action to protect the environment. So that's the precautionary principle. Or if, let's say, that we should not actually seek for complete scientific evidence before protecting the environment. For instance, let's say that contaminated water from Fukushima, if we do have complete scientific evidence to say that this actually greatly impacts the health of the people, if it's not like we need that complete evidence to actually prohibit or prevent the discharge. So once again, the precautionary principle indicates that even if there is not complete scientific evidence, we can actually seek a filing to sever that action. And there's also another key principle that has to do with collaboration and cooperation. When it comes to the environment, it indicates that the nations have to cooperate in that regard. And there's also the obligation of due diligence. So you can see that this is TEPCO that's actually conducting this particular action. So TEPCO actually has that obligation of due diligence and also for oversight. And if they were negligent, it's true that based on the new due diligence clause and principle, we can actually file a suit and seek a claim on that. So these are some of the items that we can continue on to pursue. But in terms of this filing of lawsuit, and for the government, it seems as if the government, in some sense, is actually just lending a blind eye to the situation. So filing a lawsuit may not be the most feasible option out there. But let's say that if there's a major change in the environment and the circumstances, what can happen is because they do have a plan to discharge for 30 years. It's important to make sure that we continue on to conduct and ask for a conduct of environmental impact assessment and also request information in that process. So this is something that we need to continue on to ask and request. And in the case of ITLOS, they do have a recommendation or advisory opinion process. This is different from the ruling. What happens is here, it's not Japan or Korea, but the international community if there is a legal issue, what happens is ITLOs can actually provide their advice, their recommendation. And there are particularly two cases. In 2015, it was in southwestern Africa where China and illegal fisheries was a major challenge. So it was about what kind of obligation that the flag state would have. So there was this case or this seeking of recommendation. And then the Pacific Islands have been seeing sea level rise due to climate change. And they wanted to understand what kinds of obligations other countries had. So they actually sought out for recommendation or advisory opinion of ITLOs. So what happens here is not a ruling of whether what is right or wrong. It's not about whether there are any damages that can be claimed. And that's why it can't be abstract and vague. However, it actually provides some of their take on how the UNCLOS has to be interpreted. So I do believe that this advisory opinion process can be something that we can pursue, but this is not something that can be done alone by a single country. It's important that the contracting parties of UNCLOS come together to join into a treaty and make this request to ITLOS. So that could be an alternative. And we also have the London Dumping Convention, which we call London Convention. So if there are any contaminants that shall not be discharged or disposed. But with regard to this convention, the release of the wastewater, it seems like it does go within the scope of the London Dumping Convention, but there were some issues here. You can see that in Article 1, it indicates that intentional dumping at seas of waste of other substances from ships, aircraft, and platforms, or other man-made offshore structures. This is actually the definition of dumping. But let's say that what's being released from the land, would this be within the scope of dumping, was actually a topic that was discussed. And academics were wondering whether man-made offshore structures whether pipelines can actually be included, because right now they're actually trying to utilize the pipelines to discharge this contaminated water. So academics do say that it can be included in man-made offshore structures. In the case of IMO's London Convention, even if it does not go under the scope of Article 1, experts do say that there were some precedents that actually had these issues covered within the convention, because as you know, CO2 is a major issue in the climate, and right now we see advanced nations trying to solidify this and have this buried on land. But according to the Land Convention, contracting parties have indicated that this can be a topic that can be covered. So then what about contaminated water from Fukushima? We can say that in the same vein, it actually can be covered. And yes, Korea has tried many attempts, but in 2021, at the conference of contracting parties, we have failed to actually have this tabled onto the agenda. Pacific Islands have really showed much support. However, most of the advanced nations really did not actually follow suit in our argument. So that's why we weren't able to, within this framework, actually raise a complaint. But I do want to mention that even against the London Dumping Convention, we can file a lawsuit to the arbitral tribunal. And I'll have to actually wrap up in 30 seconds. And I do want to mention that what's most important here is the fact that the countries have not agreed to our proposal. And there could be many differences in circumstances going forward. And I think that we can actually utilize our flexibility in our foreign affairs. And when it comes to marine products and fisheries goods, having that imported, this could be a major issue. And you can see that Korea, out of the three branches, as the legislative branch, the National Assembly plays a critical role. So unlike what can be done by the government, the National Assembly that represents the people can actually continue on to push ahead with many measures. So I would like to ask the National Assembly to take this into consideration. So when there is a major nuclear accident like Fukushima, would discharging contaminated water be the most desirable option? This is something that we really need to review. And if something does happen going forward, what kind of options are there, and how can we actually guarantee and secure the safety of our fisheries products that are to be imported? I think this is something that has to be reviewed by the National Assembly for their active measures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Choi, for that insightful presentation. Next, I would like to invite over Dr. Robert Richmond from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Dr. Richmond is going to please load the presentation deck and flip through on your site. Thank you.
Am I able to share my screen? Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, please do so.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity to present today. My name is Bob Richmond. I'm a research professor and director of the Wallow Marine Laboratory at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I'm also a member of the expert panel that's engaged by the Pacific Island Forum to advise the Pacific Island leaders on the safety and concerns that have been raised about this. There are 5 scientists with complementary skills. We were engaged in December of 2021, and for the last 18 months have been involved in review of existing documents. We've been in meetings with the Japanese, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, EPCO, as well as with the International Atomic Energy Agency. And several of us, myself included, traveled to Fukushima in February of last year to have a look at the site and to meet with the Japanese as well. My training is as a biologist. I also have worked in the area of radiation biology and biophysics on the uptake and accumulation of radionuclides by organisms. And I actually performed my doctoral dissertation at Enewetak Atoll in the Marshall Islands, where I spent 2 years at one of the testing sites for the nuclear testing program from the United States that during the 1950s. My concerns are along the biological side. And in this slide, it's just the route in which we're concerned that radionuclides can get into marine organisms, they can get into people. On the left side of the slide, there are 2 radionuclides that I mention here, tritium, which is a radioactive form of hydrogen, and carbon-14, which again is a radioactive version of a carbon. And the reason why we're interested in these is because all life is carbon-based. Carbon and hydrogen are the foundations of everything from our structures, our bodies, as well as our energy systems. Tritium has a half-life of about 12.3 years, carbon-14, 5,730 years. So they're pretty wide in terms of their ionizing radiation exposure and the time. On the upper left-hand panel, the beautiful green things there are phytoplankton under a microscope. These are the foundation of all oceanic food webs. And this is where a lot of the initial uptake and trophic transfer and accumulation can begin, because phytoplankton are photosynthetic like any other plant. They use solar energy to be able to make carbohydrates and sugars from carbon and hydrogen and oxygen. And these phytoplankton then are eaten by zooplankton, the small animals that live in water. And these work their way up through the food web to larval fish, to adult fish, and eventually to people. And so this is one of my overriding concerns as a marine biologist, is to look at how radionuclides interact with the ocean. We've been in some animated discussions, I'll say it politely, with a number of ocean chemists who have correctly talked about dilution and chemical interactions. But if the ocean were a sterile glass aquarium, devoid of life, it's quite different than what we're dealing with in reality. And that is the way in which radionuclides interact with organisms, by which they can take up radionuclides, they can transfer them from one trophic level, one food level to the next, and they can bioaccumulate. Tritium has been well known to be organically bound. And so once again, we're very concerned about statements that are made saying that there are drinking water standards, it's okay to drink tritium. There's a big difference between drinking tritiated water and having water that affected organisms and worked its way up through the food chain. One example recently, a study showed that the half-life of organically bound tritium in a liver of a bottom-feeding fish was over 550 days. That's quite different than what's often discussed as a few days for it to pass through. And there's a big difference in the way in which organisms, including people, process this kind of material. As a marine biologist, this is where a lot of my action is. I've been working in the Pacific Islands for 43 years, and it's very clear the connection between environmental health and human health. The two are inextricably linked. Anything that compromises the healthy environment, by definition, will impact human health. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. For the Pacific Islands and all Pacific Island nations, this addresses things like food security. For For the Pacific Islands in particular, this also affects things like cultural identity and practices. The two slides on the right, the upper one is some of my fishing buddies from Enewetak Atoll, showing communal fishing. In the lower panel there, we see women who are doing communal fishing, but this is far more than capturing protein. I do a lot of work with communities in the Pacific Islands and with groups, including the women's groups, particularly of Palau. One group of women explained to me that they consider their coral reefs and their coastal areas as the community psychiatrist, meaning this is where many of the social interactions occur that provide the very fabric of society. This is where older women mentor younger women. This is where children learn to interact. This is where problems are solved, everything from domestic disputes to governmental issues. And so for them, they indicate that even if they don't catch fish, the time they spend on these areas in these communal activities are essential to their cultural identity, to their fabric, their cultural fabric. And so while I'm a scientist and a biologist working at the interaction of radionuclides and organisms, I can't be blind to the fact that these activities that interfere with environmental health and the sustainability of ocean resources have drastic effects on the communities that depend on these resources for their very existence. This includes individual and community health, everything from diet to physical health and as well as mental health. And it's very disturbing to see that in areas where coastal resources, including coral reefs, where I do a lot of my work, have been compromised, they now have a dialysis center in Palau. Pacific Islanders have among the highest levels of coronary heart disease and diabetes in the world, non-communicable diseases, and this is tied to the health of the ocean. We know that the ocean is under multiple stressors at the moment, and this is one additional stress for which we're very concerned. This is a time when we're looking at ways in which we can improve ocean health, and clearly the way the plans are going forward is working counter to that goal. Economic stability of the islands and Pacific nations is tied to the vitality of the ocean resources and also the ecological integrity, the way in which ecosystems interact, the way the parts of the ecosystems interact, and the way in which people interact with their ecosystems, again, are foundational. And so these concerns start at the very base of the food web and work their way right up to the top, including the top consumers, which are generally people. As was mentioned in a previous discussion, that this discharge is to occur over at least 30 years. As we look carefully at the plans as they're going forward, it may actually be longer than that. And that truly is intergenerational, meaning my generation, my daughter's generation, and any generation of grandchildren that may come along. And so the question is, how can we examine this issue within the full context of what this really means? Not only is this transgenerational, but it's also transboundary. These are things that will not simply stay within the Japanese coast. And we know even the year in which the Fukushima disaster occurred in 2011, within that year, tuna were caught off the west coast of California, off of San Diego, carrying cesium from Fukushima. They were fingerprinted. The levels were low. We understand that. But the issue is that these are transboundary issues, that not only will ocean currents take radionuclides, but likewise organisms that move across the ocean, including fish. And recently it's been shown that even plastics, which are a big issue in the oceans, can carry radionuclides. Plastics, because they're petroleum products, actually often have a background signal of radionuclides, but PET plastic in particular has been found to be able to carry radionuclides and distribute across the ocean. And this gets back to the idea of environmental sustainability. So when we look holistically at not individual elements of the concerns, but the way that these could impact people, the health of the ocean, and the health of the people who depend on the ocean, there are numerous concerns that have not been adequately addressed. And as the previous speaker spoke, I'm a big fan of the precautionary principle. And what we often deal with in my line of work, I deal with everything from pesticides and heavy metals to radionuclides and to plastics. And an absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, meaning if you don't have data to show something is wrong, it doesn't default to it being right. It simply means you lack data. And this continues to be a concern for those of us on this panel, is the data gaps that continue to exist, the information that is inconsistent, the information that is non-reproducible, and the lack of critical information upon which to make sound policy decisions. For a scientist who is dealing with the intersection between science and policy on a regular basis, this is not a surprise to anybody in this room. Policy does not advance with science. Science is advancing weekly, monthly. We have new discoveries. Policy, you're very lucky if it's on the time of a couple of years to decades. And so many of the rules, regulations, and agreements that are in place today are no longer valid based on the most recent data. And we have new molecular tools. One of the ways in which we now study radionuclides and how they affect things, there are two major categories of effects. One are called the stochastic effects. Those are cancers. And as the name implies, those are by chance and they're very hard to pin down. And so this is one of the issues with things like the release of radionuclides into the ocean, is you don't see these effects for years to decades, but that doesn't mean these effects don't occur. The other kind of effect, other than stochastic, the ones that happen by chance, are the ones we call deterministic. Those are more defined, and those now we have techniques to understand things we never did before, including how radiation can affect DNA, the very information in our cells that tells us what to do. It causes DNA damage. We have two kinds of DNA in our bodies. Every organism, upper organism, has two kinds of cells, two kinds of DNA. We have nuclear DNA, which is the information that passes on your genetic information from one generation to the next. Things like eye color, skin color, baldness is genetically linked. The other part of the cell is the mitochondria. This is the power plant of the cell. And there is also mitochondrial DNA that's really important for things like metabolism. Nuclear DNA has a little bit of a protection in a nuclear membrane. Mitochondrial DNA has no such protection whatsoever. And this gets back to even the issue, often it's been said, well, tritium and these others are low-level beta emitters. Beta emitters are not as much of a concern for external exposure. I've heard people say, well, don't worry about it. You'll get more beta emissions in an airplane flight from Seoul, Korea to Los Angeles, California. But once again, that's missing the point. An external exposure to beta emitters is quite different than internal exposure. Most beta emitters are stopped by skin, certainly by clothing or by paper. But once you ingest a beta emitter, it's quite different. Your cells do not have that protection. And that's why the difference between a nuclear DNA versus mitochondrial DNA comes into effect. These DNA strands, RNA strands, and signaling proteins, and I'm kind of getting a little bit nerdy on you as a scientist, but the very things that enable us to function, to live, to survive, are all based on these very subtle chemical signalings that go on within the cell. And we have new techniques now to be able to resolve the kinds of concerns better than ever before. This idea of organically bound tritium is still an area of open research and very interesting research, but there's still a lot to be learned there. And so statements to say we are going to adhere by all accepted standards is a very different answer than we will guarantee the health of our oceans and the people who depend on the oceans. Meeting a standard does not necessarily mean that that will be healthy, and we can all think of examples where standards were established only to be revised down later as new data became available. So all of these isotopes, I've mentioned tritium and carbon-14, but these actually may not be the ones of greatest concern. Strontium is a very big concern. Strontium is called the bone hunter. It basically will adhere to bones. It will be incorporated into bones. Our bones are the site of where red blood cells are being produced, blood cells all the time. And so we have cellular division going on within the marrow of our bones on a regular basis. Strontium can then get bound into bone, and then it can bathe cells that are dividing. And that's where we start to see big concerns coming forward. So again, it's a little bit more of the heavy duty science, but it's just to point out that as we look at stochastic concerns of cancer, that's a really hard one to deal with because the epidemiology of cancer, there are so many reasons why cancer can be initiated. And so it's hard to separate out when you can really show, but there are statistics to be able to show what the chances are. And just again, hook it back to what people are being affected by. Turns out that the recent data shows that Pacific Islanders have among the highest levels of cancer in the world. And one thing is for certain, the release of radionuclides into the ocean certainly is not going to reduce cancer opportunities and stochastic chances within these populations. To then move on to my final slide is to say that, this is a tragedy. All of us who are involved in this, studying it, working with colleagues both in Japan and throughout the Pacific, realize that this was a tragedy. If you look at a number of very well-designed scientific studies, they showed that this was actually totally preventable. And this is a concern going forward. I can send references to anybody who wants, but there are two very good papers, one done by the Carnegie Institute, another good scientific study, showed the number of errors that were made that led to this. In the planning, in the execution, this never should have happened. We can't go back. We're stuck with where we are today. So if we're looking at where we are today, can we do better moving forward? As a marine biologist, I know that this is the United States ocean decade. We should be doing everything possible to remove the stressors of the ocean in a world of climate change, elevated seawater temperatures, ocean acidification, microplastics, regional pollution, and overfishing. Is death by 1,000 cuts. And anything that continues to add to this, we're not dealing with a blank canvas. It's not just radionuclides and discharges from Fukushima that matter. It's the overall health and the integrity of the ocean that is already compromised. And the question is, should we continue with business as usual, or is this an opportunity to change the trajectory going forward? This is clearly not the first, nor will it be the last such catastrophe. Unfortunate, but true. But isn't this an opportunity then to move from tragedy to opportunity? Japan could become the world's leader in advancing new approaches to a very serious international problem that's likely to increase over time. And this is what we've been promoting as well. Due to the transboundary and transgenerational nature of the problem, new approaches and alternatives to ocean dumping are clearly needed and are the only responsible way forward. And as part of our panel, it's one thing to say, no, don't do that. But we also are very careful to look at what options are scientifically supported going forward. And we're now presenting a technical memo to the Pacific Island Forum leaders showing that the use of the water to make concrete for use on the Fukushima site would use up the stored water within a much shorter period of time. Estimates are somewhere around 5 years. Concrete takes a lot of water. And once the concrete, the water is bound up in the concrete, if their advanced liquid processing system, their ALP system, is operating as they say it will to remove the higher concerning radionuclides, then in fact there should be no issue whatsoever because the beta emissions can't penetrate more than a half a 5 microns or something of that nature, 5/100ths of a micron. So we've done calculations. The concrete alternative is much better. I've been to the Fukushima site and they definitely need to pour a lot of concrete. Everything from their seawall to their underground ice barrier to keep groundwater out of the 3 reactors that are in meltdown. Also to stabilize the large quantities of radioactively contaminated soil that are in the site. And there are a couple of things, and there are lawyers here, not me, but looking at the International Atomic Energy Agency General Safety Guidance 8 talks about transboundary. If it's kept on site, that transboundary issue goes away immediately. There's another guidance that's internationally accepted called ALARA, A-L-A-R-A, as low as reasonably achievable. And that says that no one or no thing should be exposed to radiation, if at all possible. And once again, keeping it on site in concrete is a viable option going forward. So I'll simply end by saying that as a scientist, I remain concerned, along with my colleagues. We're reviewing their radiological environmental impact assessment. We see deficiencies there. We were on a 3-hour call with Japan 2 days ago. We're grateful that the conversations and communications are still open. We have a call with the International Atomic Energy next week. And we're hoping that through an honest dialogue that we would be able to insert science into this issue to be able to provide the guidance going forward. And I'll simply say, as a scientist, I would like to express my sincere respect and appreciation to the leaders from Korea, to the leaders from the Pacific Island Forum for doing their due diligence, because this is an issue, a very concerning issue now and for generations to come. It's also an opportunity to do it right at a time where we really need to be looking at the health of our oceans holistically and all of the people who depend on our oceans going forward. I would love to see the science in a major role in driving this bus, but I have to say our observations at this point are that the politics and economics are overriding much of the science. We'll continue to do our best, and I'm committed to doing the best I can as a scientist. I'm data driven. And when data are provided that show me that these issues are not a concern, I'll certainly accept them. We are certainly not at that point at this time. So thank you for your time, and I'm available as people would like to go into more detail as necessary. Thank you very much.
예, 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much. Next, we would like to move on to the discussion session. We have experts from both Korea and overseas, so I think that we will be able to have some in-depth discussions. I would like to kindly ask our discussants to keep their presentation to 5 minutes. First of all, I'd like to invite over Fairwind's Chief Engineer, Ernie Gunderson.
Hello, and thank you. Thank you also to the translators who are working very hard to do this simultaneous translation. And thank you to the Koreans and the Pacific Islanders who have taken this very important issue as seriously as it should be taken. Let me get right into my speech, and I'll be followed in 5 minutes by Maggie. Tritium is radioactive hydrogen, but it behaves identical to hydrogen. The Fukushima plant, it will not be releasing tritium directly. The tritium will be bound into water, and that's called tritiated water. Here's an example. You think of water as a hydrogen, an oxygen, and another hydrogen. That's 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. That's H2O. But one of the hydrogens in tritiated water is 3 times as heavy. And that's an H and an oxygen and a tritium atom. So the Fukushima plant will be releasing tritiated water. Once that water leaves the plant, though, the Japanese government would like you to believe it stays as tritiated water. When you imbibe tritium, tritium external to your body has no effect. When you imbibe tritium, though, when it's inside your body, it emits a radioactive particle called a beta particle that travels longer than the length of a DNA molecule. So if that tritiated water molecule is next to a DNA molecule, it will damage the DNA molecule. But the other part is what Bob was just saying is sometimes that tritium leaves the water molecule and gets attached to a carbon molecule. And in that case, it's called organically bound carbon. And the amount of time it stays in your body is dramatically different. Tritiated water stays in your body on the order of less than 50 days, but organically bound tritium stays in your body for several years. That allows that tritium that's emitting a radioactive bullet to damage the surrounding cells. So by the IAEA and the Japanese government focusing on HOT, I like to say it's hot, hydrogen, oxygen, and tritium. They changed the argument so it doesn't address the organically bound material. The other thing is that the tanks contain more than tritium. It's quite clear that they contain strontium and cesium as well. And a lot of that material, that radioactive material, has settled to the bottom of the tank. So when they're measuring in the middle or at the top of the tank, they're not determining what's in that tank. As the tank is drained, however, the particles on the bottom of the tank will also be dispersed. And I fear that the releases will not only be tritiated water, but will also be cesium and strontium and other particulate matter. I have and I'm sure Bob has research projects he would love to do as well. But lacking funding, it's very difficult to show that the damage caused by tritium. A lot of us understand that, and the industry's position is that the radiation is weak and it doesn't penetrate your skin, which is true. But if you've imbibed it or inhaled it, now it's right up against the inner membranes of cells, and that's what causes damage. I'm going to pass it over to Maggie now. Thank you.
예, 감사합니다. 이어서 매기 건더슨.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I would like to kindly ask Maggie Gunderson to continue on with their comments.
I'm here. Sorry. I've been having computer issues tonight. I apologize. Thank you all for hosting us very much. I founded Fairwinds in 2008, and one of the things that we've told all of you a lot about Fukushima in the different years. 12 years ago, the fuel melted down. It's cool now. The fact that the Japanese keep saying that they have to keep dumping all this cooling water, it's not true. Why is there still water there? TEPCO does not want to admit how Fukushima was built. And a whole mountain was cut away so they could put the plant nearer to the water, and it was cheaper to build it that way. If they had not done that, they maybe would not have had this tsunami issue that they had, plus they neglected to put up this tsunami wall. We wrote a best-selling book called Fukushima, The Truth and the Way Forward. It was a bestseller in Japan, and it was published in 2012 and was a seminal piece of work about Japan. One of the things that was really important to what we did is that even though Japan and its people are hurting, the government, especially under Prime Minister Abe, decided to keep the plants open and continue what they've done. They have forced radioactive water to come down the mountain. The water comes into the plant and runs through it and gets more and more radioactive. That's all the groundwater in that area. They have many other alternatives to running that water. For one thing, the alternatives, if you have a bathtub running and it's overflowing, you're going to turn it off. They can stop this water. We had suggested, and Dr. Richmond just talked about some of the ideas that they could do to lessen the water. We have suggested using zeolite. It's a mineral. It's not even having to make concrete. It's a mineral that absorbs and water, and it makes it into brick type things. We suggested that from the very beginning, before Japan built the ice wall or anything else. And it clearly, you can look at the site on Google Earth, and you can see that there's plenty of land in proximity. They do not have to use all these tanks. They can use zeolite to absorb the water, and it can turn into a kind of brick that they can then leave on site and store in a different manner. Additionally, if you look at Google Earth, you'll see all this open land. They're saying that they don't have any land, and that's why they need to release these tanks, and that's just not true. They can use adverse possession. Dr. Troy talked about some of the legalities, and they can take that land because it's already so contaminated. No one can build on it, use it, or live on it, or anything for thousands and thousands of years. It is adjacent to the total meltdown and catastrophe. So they can put tanks there. They don't have to release this water. And I hope that all of you we'll be able to work together on the legal issues because they're severe. I'm a paralegal. That's part of what I do that works with attorneys as an aide and a senior person. And I work with nuclear attorneys who are on the plaintiff's side every day. That's a large part of my work and why I founded Fairwinds. And I think that what's happening now can be handled by TEPCO, but they don't want to. They didn't want to handle it in the beginning. When we wrote our book, and it was fact-checked by Shueisha, who published it, TEPCO did not admit to all the things we proved and said, and we were criticized by the nuclear industry for saying these things, just like Dr. Richmond alluded to some of the criticism he's received, and we had tremendous criticism. But everything that we brought forward, right starting the day the catastrophe and the meltdown started, everything was proven within 5 years. And the final pieces, somebody internally sent us a PowerPoint that was shown inside TEPCO, and it said exactly what we'd been saying for 5 years. So I think confronting them in legal issues is one of the most important things you can do. And I agree with Dr. Richmond and Dr. Troy that these are the most precious resources that you have. As Arnie said, and we were both whistleblowers from the nuclear industry, and it's just very clear to us that the governments want to maximize their chance to keep nuclear power going in hope of someday having nuclear weapons to use. And it's going to condemn our entire world if this tritium, and I've learned from Dr. Ian Farley much of this work, and he's a world-renowned expert in tritium in UK, and he agrees with what Dr. Richmond was saying 100%. And he's proven that in data from all the nuclear plants around Europe and how they are leaking and they are contaminating and where kids are getting sick. We don't want that. We don't want that in our oceans. We don't want anything to happen to our children and our families. So please keep pushing on, and we're behind you, and we're here to help you however we can. Thank you for this opportunity.
예, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
다음으로 필립 카로
Next, I would like to invite Director Philip Carollo.
Hello, and thank you everyone for inviting me to this meeting. I know some of you guys because some of you are in the film. So I'm going to talk about the journalism point of view, okay, of this matter. I did a film about Fukushima. The name of the film is The Fukushima Disaster, the Hidden Side of the Story. And basically, I have been made aware that there was pollution coming from Japan after the tsunami in 2011, but also radiation. And one of the researchers told me that the radiation will come approximately about 4 years later than 2011, so about 2015. So anyway, after finishing my film about the plastic trash in the ocean, I just jump on the matter to find out if there is anything that I can, dig into and find some truth about it, because there was basically not much information about it. And then I found a former Japan Time magazine journalist. His name is Yoshi Shimatsu. I met him in Thailand, in Bangkok, 2014, and this is where I really decided to make a film because of everything he said about it. There was a lot to expose. There was a lot of lies. There was a lot of cover up, and so that's why I just go for it. And I wanted to expose that. So I also wanted to make people aware of the danger of nuclear radiation and the way to protect themselves. All the interviews that I made were in 2015 and 2016, and however, they're still relevant today because nothing really changed on the scientific fact. I did finish the film in February 2023, and I added the plan of Japan to dump their radioactive water. So basically, I really moved on fast on releasing the film after I heard that Japan was intending to release this water. And I was like, what? Okay. So then this is how I met Andrew Napuat, Honorable Andrew Napuat, who is a member of parliament of Vanuatu, because I knew they were actually doing a call for action when they were, you know, in the opposition side of the government here in Vanuatu. I live in Vanuatu. So then I released the film. And I believe the film is giving the full explanation for the common people to understand what we are facing. Okay, that's why people need to see the film, okay, and make a change, because when they understand, then suddenly everything could change because people will stand up and do something about it. And I think, as a filmmaker, I think, you know, the public opinion matters for governments really much. And I'm going to tell you why. Because when I start to screen the film here in Vanuatu, at the University of Vanuatu, the Japanese ambassador came to see the president of the university and said, why you are doing that? Excuse me? So the university president, who is a friend of mine, said to them, well, we are neutral here. So, you know, we are just, I think it's educative for people to know about this film, about what's happening really. So we just screen the film. Another incident, occurrence, let's say, happened when the ambassador of Japan contacted Honorable Andrew Napuat. And I know what they are going to ask because Andrew Napuat is inside the film. Okay. And another thing is they contact also the newspaper where I have an article about, you know, the film and blah, blah. So basically, I can read between the lines. The Japanese government is trying to silence me, is trying to discredit me about the accuracy of the film, and even to show the film. So, you know, free speech is kind of a problem for Japanese government. So I believe, I mean, the legal solution is very important to pursue. I believe that, and this is great, everything that you are doing, guys, over there in South Korea, and I try to link Vanuatu to that. Somehow it's not completely easy because there is a conflict of interest here. You have to understand that, you know, the Japanese government is funding a lot of projects in Vanuatu. So, you know, they cannot really go on board with us, blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of a weird situation. But I believe that if the film is going to be seen by a lot of people, it will change. It will make a change. That's why I do film, by the way, you know. The film is actually available on a lot of networks: Amazon, Apple TV, iTunes, Google Play, etc. So people can see the film really and you know, educate themselves about the whole situation, not just what's happening right now, but also the danger of the radiation. In the film, you have experts talking about it. You have Arnick Anderson, you have Maggie Anderson, you have Ellen Caldicott, you have Yoshi Shimatsu, and you know, all these people are actually experts. When I was in Japan in 2014, I was very close to the nuclear plant in Fukushima. I was in Sendai, actually. And what really was very interesting is the silence of the people. And I didn't understand why, because we're asking questions about Fukushima and we get a war. People were just leaving, were just not talking about it. And we find out later that the Japanese government passed a secret law. Arnick Anderson is talking about it in the film. And this secret law could put any scientist or doctor in jail if they were talking about the effect of the radiation near Fukushima and the reason why people die or the reason why people, you know, were sick or getting sick, or, you know. So the free, you know, there is another thing in Japan is the Kisha club system. It's called embedded journalism. And this is very important to understand the culture of Japan on this topic because, well, we cannot trust them, basically. We caught them lying already, okay? So how we can trust them today saying, okay, well, we're going to release this radioactive water that had been filtered. But in fact, we caught them already lying about the groundwater that was very, very, very radioactive. We caught them lying or not saying anything about the explosion of the 3 reactors for 2 months or 3 months, okay, on the television. Like these people can understand and can do something about it and leave the area or whatever. So anyway, so that's the thing. Yeah, the free speech in Japan is not something anymore here. I will say another thing. Just 1 second. Take coffee right away. Just 1 second. Sorry about that. A little bit of emergency. Yes. You know, there is 15 island nation countries in the Pacific, okay? And there is 41 countries that share their border with the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean is not Japan Ocean. And they need to understand that. It's as simple as that. The Pacific Ocean is shared by many people, and island countries are going to be the most affected by what they are doing right now. And that's a real problem for systems, for food security, for all this stuff that we're talking about, we're pushing to protect this country. So I think it's very important to continue to fight for that and gain everybody on board, you know. Just so you know, the way for Japan to handle the matter is not to change their mind about releasing the water, the wastewater, but is to brainwash everyone in the Pacific Island, because they came with a team of PR, okay, a team from the government to do workshop with all the journalists in the Pacific region. They didn't advertise that, by the way, but I know because I know journalists, I know people here, and they told me. So they were doing like a presentation showing how safe it is to discharge this water into the ocean. And because people, they don't know too much, like Margit Anderson was saying, it's kind of a nuke speak, you know, how they can understand the thing, you know. So they say, oh, okay, well, thank you very much for the information. But in fact, it's a brainwash machine around the Pacific, you know. So what are they doing? What are they doing? There is something hidden in the story here, and the Japanese government is not saying everything. How? It seems like, and I'm just going to open a door here for people to think about it, but there is some hidden forces, evil forces at work here. That's the reason why, you know, Japan continuing this thing. If you watch my film, you will see that there is a nuclear mafia in Japan. Okay, and then this is a conflict of interest. They are not working for the people. That's the problem, you know. So, like Maggie Anderson was saying, we have been lied to, and the reason why we still have nuclear plant today is because of the war-grade plutonium, and that can, you know, get you know, for the construction of bombs and war. National security. Now we're talking about something very, very different. Now, there is some information that I have, I cannot disclose because it's national security of Japan, and I will not disclose it publicly because it's dangerous. But I can tell you one thing is that they are not saying the whole truth. And then if they were, why they try to censor other people who talk about it if they have the proof? So that's the thing. So why they don't let other scientists like Dr. Richmond or Annick Anderson to check the water? Because they got a point. Why they don't test foreigner? That's all. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate that.
예, 감사합니다. 그러면 다시
Yes, thank you very much. So let us come back here on site to hear from Marie Chung from Greenpeace. Good afternoon. I am Marie Chang, campaigner at Greenpeace, an international group and environment group, and it's a great pleasure to be joined by many experts. In the case of Greenpeace, it was 2018 where when we've heard of the plan of TEPCO's discharge plan, we actually released the very first report on their very malicious plan on discharging contaminated water. And ever since, we've been really much focused on the alternatives and options. And one was about how we can respond with regard to international law. And it's a great pleasure to see this conference really dealing with that very topic. And we have many experts from around the world, and I can see that in your respective disciplines there are many limitations, but I really want to extend my gratitude of your active participation despite the very many limitations that you may be facing. In the case of the National Assembly, when you do ask the Korean government to respond legally based on international law, I do want to mention some of the key aspects that has to be taken into consideration. Next page, please. So, if I may first summarize the gist of my presentation with regard to contaminated water, to have it discharged for 30 years. So, we're talking about the 30 years basically. But what I do want to say is that if we do want to internationally respond based on international law, one of the realistic approaches is that before the reactor is decommissioned, we will be seeing highly toxic materials continuously be generated. The Japanese government said that in 50 years' time, they're actually going to create a park and really bring the overall environment back to previous levels. However, you can see that just a couple of months after the accident, this was a plan that was announced by the government, so that was back then. But right now, if you look at the site, the reactors, there were 3 reactors that actually melted down. And if you look at the 3 reactors, they also have different circumstances, but nothing was taken into consideration. They do have a very much unscientific and unrealistic plan, but it's not very well known that this is directly related to the discharge of contaminated water. So in order to decommission the power plant compared to Chernobyl, it will take at least 50 years or even a century of time to have it decommissioned. However, despite this very fact, how should this be reflected in our discourse? So for it to be decommissioned, as mentioned, we will need a century of time. And if we think about the contaminated water that's generated in the interim, there is no plan set out by the Japanese government. And Greenpeace last year, we took part officially in a conference on what should be done with regard to the highly toxic contaminated water. We asked this question, and they said that they'll first discharge the contaminated water and then think afterwards of what they will have to do about this. So the reason why we do have to discharge this contaminated waters is the fact that this water is not going to impact us just for the 30 years, because it's going to be discharged continuously even after the 3 decades. And that's why we need to make sure that we make submissions based on international law. And yes, if I may move on. And the second point that I would like to mention is, as was mentioned by our Dr. Richmond and Gunderson, the tritium. There was a lot of focus on tritium and of how we're going to strategically focus on this very topic, as was mentioned by experts and by many. For countries that have nuclear reactors, of course, it goes through a specific processing process. But yes, there's a discharge of tritium in that process. And typically, in the case of domestic reactors and the water that's discharged and what's different from this water, there isn't a lot that has been brought up on the surface. You can see that this is not only about this tritium water. in our environment, unless there is a major accident, there are many nuclear fuel items and substances that are also included in this contaminated water, which we would not be in contact if there wasn't an accident. So we really need to focus on this very fact. And I do want to mention that it's not just about tritium. There's also much more nuclear fuel that is included in this water. In order to verify this, there is ALPS, the Advanced Liquid Processing System. And like the plan of Japan and IAEA, if it's really going to just have tritium and only tritium, well, this actually has to be utilized in order to verify. We have delegations and many researchers that are trying to sample the water from K4 tanks, and nothing has been concluded as of yet, but what they're saying is that there's a highly likelihood that the announcement would be that these samples indicate that only tritium would be the only remaining substance in the water. However, in addition to K4 tanks, it's true that the additional sampling should be required, not only from these tanks but from other tanks. And right now, if you look at TEPCO, as was mentioned by Mr. Gunderson, there's sludge within the tanks. We do have they're announcing that there is no sludge within the tank. However, based on third-party verification, it's true that this sludge, how it's processed from ALPS, as is argued by TEPCO, is there really no sludge, because sludge is high-level radioactive waste. And would the ALPS really be able to process this high-level sludge is something that has to be verified by third-party experts. And it's highly likely that such verification would not take place. But at any rate, without such verification and validation, I do have to say that ALPS may actually go to a failure. It's something that will not be able to process what has to be processed. So we really need to focus on this as well. And then moving on to contaminated water, what was mentioned and verified by the delegation is that these facilities, whether this is being run appropriately, so that's basically it within their scope of inspection. But of course, even if it's operating under the plan of IAEA and TEPCO, we do have to mention that this is only an inspection of the engineering per se. If we do have the water discharged for 30 years, the ecological impact, the environmental impact, and also the transboundary nature of these challenges is something that has to be assessed, but this has not been done. And this also is in violation of international law, and that's why we really need to raise an issue for this very fact. And then last but not least, this plan or decision of discharging contaminated water, this actually goes against the guidelines of IAEA, and I'm pretty sure that IAEA is already aware of this. I was mentioned by Dr. Richmond at PIF, one of the experts from Pacific Islands Forum has been continuously raising this topic. So I've only mentioned GSG 9 here on this slide, but I do want to mention that in the GSG 9 guidelines, what has to be included in the radioactive assessment, in other words, with regard to radioactivity within the Japanese environment has not been assessed according to the guidelines. And GSG 8, what is indicated here is on the losses and damages incurred in a transboundary fashion. And if this is not justified, and let's say that just like if it's to impact the international environment, the guidelines indicate that anything as such as the disposal of contaminated water should not take place. And TEPCO really needs to abide by these rules, and IAEA has oversight on this. However, this is not being done, and this is something that we really need to file as a complaint. And as Dr. Maggie Gunderson has mentioned in her comments, at the end of the day, it may be the fact that the countries, including Korea, really upholding nuclear power plants and trying to compromise the impact it has on the environment. Those that really try to uphold nuclear power plants, maybe this type of custom and attitude may have led to justifying the dumping of contaminated water from the Fukushima nuclear disaster. And I really want to raise this point. And I do want to mention that ecologically speaking, environmentally speaking, and also the impact that it has on the residents, this hasn't been taken into consideration. It's just purely based on an engineering point of view. And to say that nuclear reactors are safe, that it's the most desirable option, I think that this type of mindset, culture, and institutional framework is also to a fault, and is also at fault. And Greenpeace, continue on, will start off our activities in Korea and around the world to really make sure that everybody knows that this is not something that can be sustained. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to invite over Mr. Ki-ho Song, lawyer of law firm Suryan Asia. Hello, everyone. My name is Song Ki-ho. I would like to thank all the participants for staying with us till the very end. And I would like to thank Dr. Choi and Dr. Richmond for those insightful and useful presentations, and also the discussions and the comments made by Ernie, Maggie, and Director Felipe, and also Chang. They were very useful and very helpful. I think that we are in a catch-22. Here we have Fukushima wastewater. And what's ironic is that the Korean government is not really opposed to dumping of that water into the ocean. So in that light, we have to find solutions how we can dissuade and prevent Japan from that move. The previous administration, the Moon Jae-in administration, for those of you joining us overseas who are not familiar with the Korean politics, the previous government actually, President Moon, did not say that the water from the Fukushima Daiichi power plant is safe. I think that the current government is trying to paint the picture as such. However, that's not correct. According to many papers and data, the previous government, the Moon Jae-in administration, starting from 2021, had pointed out how contaminated water should not be dumped into the Pacific Ocean and how it is forbidden under the London Convention. So the previous government of Korea had strongly opposed to the Japanese plan. So what I would like to say is that the main opposition party of Korea, the Democratic Party, I think should lead the way. I think that we have to bring together the NGOs and civic society and put together a group of plaintiffs so that we can fight this case under the international law of the sea. Yes, I think that we have to refer the case to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, and also refer the matter to UNCLOS. And I think that we have to really persuade the current government to oppose the Japanese move. However, I'm skeptical whether or not it has the willingness to do so. And today, here we have many participants joining us from not just Korea, but from Europe. And from Germany, I believe that we have Anna Bonliebe with us. So not just Korea, but also from Europe and also from the Pacific Island countries. I think that we have to come together and put together a group of plaintiffs and refer the matter to the UN. Especially, I think that we have to refer the case to the US court. In other words, I think that we have to exercise our rights under the international laws. That is something that we need to do. But at the same time, if the Korean government is reluctant to do so, and if the government is not willing to fulfill its responsibilities, then as a backup measure, we have to put together a group of plaintiffs comprised of many different stakeholders so that we can refer the matter to the United Nations. I did prepare my paper, and it's included in the booklet, but I don't think that I have time to cover everything. But I'd like to say this. I think that what is clear is the Korean government has banned import of Fukushima fishery products. And yes, we have sent the inspection team to inspect the Japanese plan to discharge the contaminated water. And if the team comes back and announces that it's okay to do so, then I think that it will be like foregoing its own right to prevent the Japanese plan under the international law. It is my understanding that the Japanese government understands its responsibility to share data, to provide explanation on its plans, and I believe that by inviting the Korean inspection team, it is claiming that it has fulfilled those responsibilities. So again, the inspection team that was dispatched from Korea is just limited to inspecting the facilities, and what the data that they obtained is limited to what is shared by the Japanese government. So despite this limitations in the inspection, if the Yoon Suk-yeol government announces that there is no problem with the Japanese plan to discharge water, then I think that under the international laws, we won't have any cause to or reason to justify our rights under the international laws. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. We have two more panelists to join us. We have from West US, Dana Ung, environmental activist, and we have Anna von Rebay, international maritime lawyer. So first, Dana Ung, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor and a tremendous privilege to be here amongst friends who care about the health of the earth and to be a channel for many of the beings on this planet who don't speak our language. My name's Dana, and I'm one of the many voices in a global coalition called the Ocean Health Cooperative. I'm also a geneticist by trade, so when I heard about the radioactive water potentially becoming a staple of our lives and affecting our body's building blocks, that was really scary to learn. But there's been so much gratitude that greets me when I wake up every morning to this growing movement of now millions of people from every background, every industry you can think of, all over the world, because we recognize that we're all connected to this one body of water. And so I'm here today to share the coalition's vision of oceans so blue and healthy that when we swim, eat, and breathe it all in, we'll know that it's restoring and healing us. One of well-fed and happy whales and dolphins whom we're just now learning how to communicate with, and to have the bottom of the ocean be teeming with life, getting us ready for the next stage of evolution because we co-evolve with life around us. Our breath, our water, and our food come from somewhere, right? And so we share this planet with all life, and we need these systems to keep us alive. And all the while to be friends and to be rooted in love and joy while pursuing goals to make this vision come alive. And so we have this huge collective responsibility to make the right decision for the world that's possible. I was told one time that 2 out of 3 breaths that we take is coming from the ocean. And I think it's likely more than that now due to all of the deforestation around the world. So we're now almost completely reliant on this body of water for life. And we're living in the decade of the ocean, according to the UN, and we're 3 years in with 7 more to go. So we have a chance to turn things around, and one of those chances will be made by the people in this room today. And I agree with Bob that this is a huge opportunity to demonstrate better stewardship of the ocean. So fortunately, there are hundreds of organizations, companies, institutions who've gathered in solidarity with all of us to assure that our greatest life support system, the ocean, the source of water and life, stays pure. And so our coalition holds 4 pillars in mind and in practice: the scientific explorations of environmental and health impacts, as well as alternatives and remediation solutions, of which there are several now; education through art and storytelling, which has now received millions of impressions through hundreds of networks; community building, and the international agreements that we've made since 1972, that being the law. So on that note, I'd like to pass the mic over to Anna, who will share a little bit more about this. And thank you so much for holding this space for this discussion and we look forward to sharing more conversations around solutions. I have a lot of hope, and I know that we have a lot of support, so let's keep going.
예, 이어서 부탁드립니다.
Yes, Dr. Anna?
Thank you so much for this opportunity to take part in this conference. My sincerest respect to the host of this conference, the inhabitants and governments of Korea and the Pacific Islands, and worldwide for taking interest in saving the ocean. The ocean is one ecosystem as a whole. We must understand that, and we must understand that it is our common obligation to protect it. So thank you for the opportunity to participate in discussing legal pathways. My name is Anna van Riebe. I am the founder of the law firm Ocean Vision Legal. Ocean Vision Legal is the first law firm worldwide that is entirely specializing in ocean litigation for marine protection. The law firm is based on my expertise as a litigation lawyer and the protection of the marine environment. I have worked many years in litigation and now focus on litigation to international courts, especially to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, ITLOS. Furthermore, I wrote my expertise is based on this years of litigation, but also on my research in marine protection law. Last week, I published my doctorate thesis, which analyzes the obligations of states to protect and preserve the marine environment. We have heard about these obligations under UNCLOS. This is Article 192, and in my writings, I analyzed this article in depth in order to show that UNCLOS does provide legally binding obligations, but it is on us and even more on the states to start enforcing them. With regards to legal pathways for what is happening or for the plans of Japan to release nuclear wastewater in the ocean, there are, from an international pathway, different angles. Some a little bit softer, some a little bit harder. When we look at this plan, two especially come into mind, two angles. One, the law of the sea angle that we heard about, and also human rights violations, because humans are very bound to the health of the ocean. In fact, the ocean should have a right itself. When we look at the human rights pathways, the main problem is that Japan, although signing a few human rights treaties, did not sign the protocols that confer jurisdiction onto the committees. So Japan can internationally not be sued for breaching human rights. However, there are also other pathways, softer pathways. Currently, or in the past, already 2 times, complaints have been raised to the Special Rapporteur of the Human Rights Council for Japan's plan to release the nuclear wastewater in the ocean. This doesn't lead to a legally binding outcome, but it creates a lot of publicity, and it shows that individuals, organizations, and the civil society is standing up because they are afraid that their human rights are being violated. We are in Ocean Vision Legal currently working on something similar, which we will publish during the next week. I cannot completely go into detail with that because it is at a critical phase. We are just finalizing it, and with the help and support of Dana's organization, we are going to publish this next week, and we would be very honored and pleased if as many of you could support us in campaigning for this action. Especially finding these complaints to the Special Rapporteurs of the Human Rights Council, although they do not in itself have legally binding effect, they can create a pathway to further more legally binding actions. One angle that we have not looked at today at all is, for example, turning to the Security Council of the United Nations. because we are in a very unique situation that all 5 veto powers of the Security Council actually addressed and voiced that they do not welcome Japan's plan to release the nuclear wastewater in the ocean. The special argument or the special opportunity to turning to the Security Council is that the Security Council worldwide is the only authority that we have that is mandated to pass legally binding decisions. The competence of the Security Council is invoked in situations that are likely to endanger the maintenance of international peace and security. And the Security Council in the past has acknowledged that violations of human rights, even outside of warfare, can amount to threats of international peace and security. Furthermore, the willful destruction of the environment can invoke the competence of the Security Council. Beside these human rights pathways, of course, we have looked at the law of the sea angles. For the law of the sea angles, we have 2 avenues. We can go for contentious cases that one state sues Japan, or for advisory opinions. Both is possible before ITLOS or ICJ. For the contentious cases, we need a state suing Japan. For the advisory opinion, as has already pointed out, before ITLOS, we only need 2 states who agree that they give the ITLOS jurisdiction to give an interpretation on the law, to decide to actually state whether this plan is lawful or not. This is beneficial with regards to, or more beneficial than going to the ICJ, because for the ICJ, we would need a 2/3 majority in the General Assembly to invoke the jurisdiction of the ICJ. So turning to ITLOS, an advisory opinion would be actually a very feasible way. The one difficulty is that only legal questions can be asked to ITLOS. So we need to be very careful on framing the question and put a lot of effort into this. I'm currently working on 2 advisory opinions to ITLOS, especially on Article 192, which is the content of my doctoral thesis and the content of my expertise. And I would be very, very pleased to help and to offer my support in any further action to ITLOS and with my special expertise. Also, I'm based in Germany, where ITLOS is based, so I'm very close and I'm very happy to support any action. Thank you so much for the opportunity to taking place in these discussions and for all these very, very interesting and amazing comments and discussions. Thank you.
예, 수고해 주신
Yes, thank you
토론자분들에게
very much
감사드립니다.
once again. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. We are behind schedule, but we do have a Q&A session. We would just like to ask you one question that we received beforehand. It's particularly for Maggie Gunderson and Ernie Gunderson. So at the time of the Fukushima accident, with former Prime Minister Tan Naoto, I know that there was this discussion with regard to the Fukushima accident, and there were many activities that were underway. And back then, the Japanese government and TEPCO and their approach back then, what kind of comments did the Prime Minister have to share last time when you had that discussion? Is there anything that you can share with us today?
네. Mr. Ernie Gunderson?
Arnie, are you on?
Yes, I just picked on.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I spent a better part of a week with Prime Minister Khan in California and in New England, and we had many times to talk. And I asked him about the lack of adequate response by the Japanese government. And I think his response was shocking and truthful. He told me that the Tokyo Electric and METI, M-E-T-I, that's the regulator of nuclear power in Japan, were, his exact words, were neither truthful nor timely in the information that they gave him. Now, what that means is that the nuclear industry in Japan was so powerful, it was willing to lie to the prime minister about a triple meltdown that was occurring. He was obviously very, very frustrated. And I think that these tritium releases that they're proposing follow on in that same pattern. You'll recall that Tokyo Electric refused to use the word meltdown for 5 months. There's many other examples of that, but this is a industry and a nation that is willing to lie to its own prime minister. So that I just don't believe that what they're saying about tritium is appropriate. I also want to talk a little bit about the role of the IAEA. It's important to realize that the IAEA's charter, its own charter, Article 2 of the charter, says that its job is to promote nuclear power. And I have it right here. The agency shall seek to accelerate and enlarge the contribution of atomic energy. So that we count on them to be a watchdog is really not within their own personal charter. We saw the same thing with the regulators here in America. The American government supports and is encouraging both maintaining existing nuclear plants and building new ones. As Fukushima was exploding, the Secretary of the Department of Energy, Secretary Chu, was on television saying that it was no worse than 3 Mile Island. And luckily I was on television right after him, and I refuted that. And I said, this is as bad, if not worse, than Chernobyl. I'd also add that the United States State Department, 1 month after the meltdown, signed an agreement with Japan to continue to buy Japanese food, even though they didn't know the contents of it. And even though tuna were showing up in America with very high levels of cesium. So the American nuclear industry and the American government have the same set of blinders about the health effects to the Pacific Islanders, the people of Korea, and in fact, the Japanese population. We are seeing cesium right now off the coast of California, and that clearly came from Fukushima. And if we can see cesium off the coast, we'll certainly detect tritium when it's released. So my closing here is that the disastrous meltdowns at Fukushima were created, what I said is the worst industrial accident, worst industrial catastrophe in the history of the world. And as climate change becomes more frequent and intense, every country with atomic power should worry that a meltdown or a series of meltdowns could happen in their country. The Fairwinds logo says that radiation knows no borders, and it certainly is true about the proposed releases at Fukushima. Thank you.
예, 감사합니다.
Thank you very
그럼
much.
이상 질의응답을
With that, we would like to wrap up Q&A session.
안녕하세요. 저 양이원영 국회의원입니다.
Hello, I am parliamentarian Yang Won-young, and I'd like to share some words. Again, the conference was to discuss international legal issues and response, and we have many experts joining us from overseas. So I do have a quick question I would like to ask. So the violation of UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And in order to refer the case to ITLUS, I understand that the state has to take action. But the opposition party in Korea believes that we have to refer the matter to ITLUS. However, I am a member of an opposition party. So would there be any other countries around the world, for example, in the Pacific any country is interested in taking the lead to refer the matter to ITLOS, and if we were to do so, what sort of international help or support would be required? I understand that it can be very financially burdensome to take the matter to ITLOS. So anyone who has insights on what would entail to take the matter to ITLOS? Anyone?
예. 애나 본 리베 변호사님.
Yes, Dr. Anna?
Yes, thank you for clarifying that again. So there are two ways to go to ETLOS. One is a contentious case in which one state sues another state. For that, we do not need another state. However, suing another state, of course, is also something that one state sometimes is not inclined to do because for the political relationships, of course, is a little bit difficult. However, if you wanted to have a contentious case in which the full array of violations could be investigated by ITLOS, that would be possible by Korea itself. To do an advisory opinion, this requires at least one other state, because the two states need to have an agreement in which it says, we, the coalition of the two states, give the advisory jurisdiction to ITLOS. With regard to the fundraising and with regard to the funds that it costs, yes, an international lawsuit does cost money. I'm very happy to support in finding funders for this. This will be much easier once we are thus far that, for example, Korea and maybe one or other state agree to wanting to bring that action, because this will incline funders to support this action. And I'm very happy to reach out to my network, which of course consists a lot of these international legal actions, because I am working on 2 advisory opinions to ITLOS, and I'm very happy to provide any help in finding support, and also very happy to supporting this action itself with my expertise in law, if there are any more questions.
예, 답변 감사합니다. 그럼
Thank you very much
이상으로
for the response.
후쿠시마
And with that,
사고
we
원전
would like to
오염수
close the
방류
conference on the
인생
international
배제
legal issues and
방안 긴급
responses
간담회를
for discharging Fukushima nuclear water release. Thank you very much.
음.